Morning, everybody. Welcome to 08:15 on the 11th of May. Thank you for being with us at such an early point, and possibly even before you get the kids to school. Who knows? Hopefully, you've all got coffee sorted, and hopefully, this isn't a new experience for you. We've put on a series of these webinars now, and it's great to know that we've got some familiar faces that come into the room. So, my name is Mark Moore. I'm director of the Southwest Cyber Resilience Centre for everybody else's sins and my own. And this is part of a series of webinars that we run just to try and demystify some technical topics for you. I'm not going to speak for long, you'll be glad to know, but I am going to really briefly just touch on a couple of things about what the Cyber Resilience Centre does and is. If you've not encountered us before, where on earth have you been? Do say hi in the chat bar as well. And if you want to put any questions in there, of course, we'll pick those up at the tail end. We're scheduled for about half an hour this morning. What we do is we deliver a bunch of, yes, webinars, but also free guidance just to try and demystify some of those difficult topics around cybersecurity. We are funded by the Home Office, not for profit, and don't charge for the vast majority of what we do. And we're here for small businesses, charities, and the public sector. So if you sign up on our website, we will send you a bunch of what you need to know, a 12-week bite-sized plan, and some regular updates on things to look out for. So hopefully it keeps you safer. If you need more technical things, we have a student service cyber path offering, and we know some great people that can generally assist. So for people that you know, I hope we can assist. Find out more about us if you haven't already. So there you go. There's the address. I promised I wouldn't monologue, and I shan't. So I am absolutely delighted to welcome to the stage a genuine expert this morning, John Innes, who is the Threat Intelligence Product Director for Crossword Cybersecurity, one of our collaborators. So John, I'll pass over to you, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Mark. And good morning, everyone. So I know this is a bite-sized session this morning. So we're going to cover a few things around really kind of like passwords and security. And I'm sure you've probably heard all sorts of guidance around passwords and security, turn on multi-factor authentication, use password safes, things like that. But actually, today I'm going to talk a little bit more about why you should do that rather than how you should do that. I spend a lot of my time working on products that monitor criminal forums and things like that. So we see a lot of interesting data on those forums. And I'm actually going to share that with you today, or some of that with you today, so you can actually fully appreciate why us in the security community keep banging on about multi-factor authentication and unique passwords and things like that. And it will give you a flavor for, I think, why it matters a bit more. So what we're going to do today is we're just going to talk at a very high level about the dark web. Some of you may have used it before, but probably most of you haven't. So I'm just going to kind of talk a little bit about what it is. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how it was created, how there's something called the onion router, which is fundamentally a piece of software and a mechanism to access the dark web. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about how that was created and why it was created. And then we're just going to actually start looking at the ecosystem and some of the faces behind the attacks. So there's been a number of arrests over the last few years, and we've had an opportunity to learn a bit more about some of the characters behind these attacks. And it's quite interesting, I think, some of the profiles. And then we're going to close off with, once again, some security measures that you can take that will hopefully make you far less vulnerable than perhaps other people. And that's the key to all of this, is not being the weakest one in the network. So just a little bit about the dark web. We on news articles and like sensational news feeds and things like that, you hear about the dark web all the time, and it just sounds really sort of mysterious. But what actually is it? So in cybersecurity, we kind of talk about three spaces, I suppose, in terms of where data resides. We talk about the surface web. So this is actually everything that you would use day to day. So this is like, if you Google something and you find results, this is what we consider on the surface web. It's very easy to find. It's kind of totally accessible, and Google can kind of stumble across it in its searches. Then we have the deep web, and the deep web is really somewhere you cannot find what's inside it without authenticating in some way. So you perhaps have to log in first before you can search it. And a bank account's a good example of the deep web. If Google was able to index my bank statements, that would be a problem. And Facebook's actually considered the deep web as well. You quite often, if you set your things to private, then you need to have rights to be able to see those things. And then we have the dark web, and that requires a special service or a special browser that you launch in order to be able to access certain parts of the internet. So Google can't see them. You can't just go www, something or other.com, because it won't work. You have to install a little bit of software on your computer to be able to access the dark web. Now, to give you a little bit more context about why the dark web even exists, so it was actually the Onion router was created by the US government, actually, the Naval Research Labs, back in the 90s. And really what they wanted to do was they wanted to be able to communicate from point A to point B without anyone in the middle being able to see where it came from or where it was going or who was talking on the network. So it was created for, if you like, covert communications, but really just good security. That's what they were trying to achieve. In early 2000s, Tor was actually launched. So its aim was, as I say, to really create a secure channel. And the idea here is, again, like, as I mentioned, if you go to facebook.com, that's really your computer going pretty much straight to facebook.com. So Facebook can see where you came from, perhaps see where you're located and things like that. And Tor's trying to avoid all of those things. So actually, in 2000s, Tor was launched, and then it was a little bit technically complex to use. So what came out of that was actually they just created their own internet browser. So very much like Chrome or Firefox, you can now actually just download a Tor browser, and that browser, as soon as it starts up, it does all of the technical bits and pieces that you need, and then you're instantly on accessible dark web networks. So it's become incredibly accessible and incredibly easy to use. And again, that's sort of deliberate, actually, because what the creators wanted was as many people to use that network as possible, because then actually, if the government were using the network, then they would get lost in all the noise of all the other people using the network. And the more people using it, the more anonymous it would become. So Tor is actually very, very easy to use nowadays, and it's very, very easy to set up. Now, a couple of questions on this. Is Tor illegal? It is absolutely not at all. I mean, it is in a couple of countries where they kind of want to suppress free speech and things like that. So I don't think you can use it in China, for example. But certainly in the UK, it's not illegal at all, or the US. It's just a network that anybody can use. Is it evil? Again, we talk about the dark web like being an evil place. It's not. Intentionally, no, it's not evil. There's a lot of people that use Tor and the dark web for the right reasons. So actually, people who want freedom of speech, or they're living in regimes where they're trying to suppress freedom of speech. Tor is a good way to get news out and get messages out and stay anonymous safely. Is the dark web safe? I'm going to use Tor and the dark web interchangeably here because they're effectively pretty much one and the same thing. Yes and no. So actually, if you wanted to go and download the browser, fire it up and connect to the Tor network, you are completely safe. Like, nothing bad's going to happen there. However, when you connect to those websites that are on Tor, there is a reasonable chance that they are hosting malicious content. So unless you are confident where you're visiting, you should be very cautious. So there are companies like Facebook who have websites on the dark web, and they're obviously completely safe if you trust Facebook. I mean, that's a whole different conversation. But generally the network is safe. There are good resources on it, but there are also bad resources on it. So you need to be very, very conscious about what you're visiting when you're on the dark web. So that's just a little bit about what the dark web is. It's actually, the complexities and the cleverness of it is in hiding people for good intent. The darker side of that is obviously that because people can hide, then they're much more likely to want to use it for criminal activity as well. So where do criminals share your data? We've just been talking about the dark web, and the obvious one is actually dark web forums. So again, if you fire up the Tor browser, and there are, it's quite hard to find some things on the dark web because there isn't really a Google. There is a couple of things, but it's not like you can just Google things, really. A lot of these things are deliberately hidden, and you almost need to know from word of mouth where to go in order to find a forum. But it's great for criminality. So actually, if I want to sell people's data, then setting up a dark web forum is going to keep me safe. It's going to stop law enforcement finding me, and I can sleep easy at night as a criminal. The problem with dark web forums, as I just mentioned, is they're not great for advertising. So, you know, criminals are usually in this for money. If they're stealing data and selling data, they're doing it for money. And dark web forums are not always the best place to do that, actually, because, again, they're hard to find and you kind of have to get access to them. It's actually very slow as well. So dark web forums get all the headlines, you know, the dark web, but actually we see more and more criminals moving to what we call the deep web forums. So these are connecting, you can get to these straight from your normal internet connection, but you usually have to log into them first. So this is much quicker, it's much easier for people to find. So the flip side, there's a trade-off. See, even criminals have to trade off security. They're like, do I want complete security or do I want marketing? Like, so they have to kind of balance between whether they want, which one do they want. And actually, usually it will depend on what they're selling as to whether or not they're going to go to the dark web or the deep web. So actually, if they're selling guns, that might be a good place to put that is on the dark web because they need absolute privacy. If they actually have a large volume of things to sell, perhaps like drugs or data, then actually a deep web forum might be more attractive to them. The problem with those is that Facebook is indeed on the dark web, thank you. The problem with the deep web forums is that they are less private. So we're seeing more and more law enforcement shutting these things down at the moment. So there's been several high profile ones over the last few weeks. So there was a forum called Raid Forum, which was absolutely massive. And that had been running for a number of years and hosting people's data. Law enforcement managed to identify not only where it was hosted, but who was running it. And they eventually arrested that person and shut down that site. So this was good news. Of course, immediately they did that, another forum started up called Breached Forums, which was a mirror copy. And that also has now been shut down and the individual arrested. And we'll kind of get into that in a bit more detail because it's interesting. And another one, which is in the news just a few weeks ago, was Genesis Market. And we'll talk about that one a little bit more. So dark web forums are great for privacy, but they're tricky to market. Deep web forums are great for marketing, but they're tricky to stay out of jail. So what we're now seeing is actually criminals are moving again. So they're sharing more and more data on things like Telegram. So the idea here is actually if I share data on something, I mean, for those of you who haven't used it, Telegram is very, very similar to WhatsApp. So they can create a channel, they can invite people into it, and then they can start posting data into that channel. And the nice thing about this is, like, the only person who knows where that connection came from is actually Telegram. I think Telegram's got infrastructure all over the world, and I think they might even be Russian owned, so they're not likely to share anything. And for law enforcement to shut it down, it's they're going to have to shut down an entire messaging application. So the criminals are always finding new novel ways to move their data around safely and securely through lessons learned. So this is where we're seeing the movement of data at the moment. All of these things still exist, but dark web forums are becoming slightly less popular at the moment. Deep web forums are starting to get real pain in terms of getting arrested. So we're now seeing the criminals moving on to messaging channels. So here's a couple of screenshots of a deep web forum. So this was actually a forum called Breached, which was shut down a couple of months ago. It was started by an individual called Pom Pom Purin. And the whole point of this website was that people were going and they're stealing data in job lots. So they're hacking into a website, downloading all the data, and then they're putting it onto this forum. And they're either selling it or they're giving it away or they're swapping it or something like that. So from the moment it started, this became hugely popular. So I think this forum started and within 6 months it had 100,000 users or something like that. So it's become a very, very popular pastime for cyber criminals. And emotionally, these places are very interesting too, because actually, you and I are probably looking at this going, this is criminality, it's outrageous. When you actually join one of these forums, what you'll find is a real sense of kind of brotherhood and community. And the people on these forums really love what they do. And they kind of, for the most part, are very protective and defensive about what they do, either because they're kind of trying to show off their skills and abilities or they've got some other mission. But the second screenshot, you can't really see that, I don't think. But there was an individual case on here which demonstrates the potential hostility if you try and interfere with what these people are doing. So somebody managed to steal some data from a firm, and they uploaded it onto this forum for sale. So they said, like, this data is for sale for, I can't remember, let's say it's £1,000. Does anyone want to buy it? The company that actually got hacked and had all their data stolen found out, and they put a post on the forum saying, hey, this is our data, don't sell it, like, it's proprietary, it's private, you shouldn't have it. So the owner of the forum actually bought the data from the seller for £1,000 or whatever it was, and then posted it for free, and then said, there you go, it's no longer for sale, everyone can have it for nothing. And it was really, the point he was making is, like, don't tell me what to do. Like, you could have just had this sold to one person, and now I've given it to everybody because you've tried to interfere in my forum. So it was an act of aggression on the part of the owner, but it was also done almost as a joke, kind of like a childish joke, if you see what I mean, a bit of a prank. Now, what's interesting here is who was behind this forum. So, as I say, the forum was created. An individual called Pom Purin started the forum. It became hugely popular very, very quickly. And this individual rose to fame in the community because he started pulling off all sorts of wacky heists. So he hacked into the FBI's email servers, and then he started emailing out hundreds of people from the FBI making claims about a certain individual. And of course, this is going to draw a huge amount of attention to yourself. Like, the FBI aren't really going to appreciate that you've just broke into their mail servers. But he did it, and he became a little bit of a legend, a little Robin Hood in the criminality marketplace. And again, so he claimed responsibility. An individual called Pom Purin claimed responsibility. The same Pom Purin owned this forum that was buying and selling data and giving it to people. The same Pom Purin then started actually uploading data that he'd stolen to other places on the internet, like Have I Been Pwned. So he was actually stealing the data and uploading it to Have I Been Pwned to let everybody know that he'd stolen it. So he became very notorious very, very quickly. Now, he's just been arrested like a couple of months ago, and the FBI raided a house. They found out who was doing all of this, and this is the individual in the bottom right-hand corner, a chap called Connor Fitzpatrick, who's barely out of his teens, actually. He might still be in his teens. So this all sounded like a highly sophisticated attack, but actually behind the scenes, it was kind of a kid who was bored and wanted to be famous. Now, the next one here is, the slides aren't building, so I've got a screenshot here. The animation is not working. So the next one is actually, there was another criminal group called the Dark Overlord, and this group sounded very, very sophisticated. They managed to break into some really big companies, and they started making demands. So this was slightly before the ransomware days. It was blackmail, but it was actually in a different guise. So they actually broke in, just stole data, and then they contacted the company who they stole the data from. They said, either give us money or we're going to release the data to the world. It was a very big company that they did this to, so it was taken pretty seriously. What it actually turned out, once again, the person behind this eventually got identified and arrested. And the person who did this was this chap in the bottom left-hand corner, who you can see, a chap called Nathan Wyatt. He's from the UK, and he actually bought a username and a password from a forum for $10. And then he used that username and password to access a remotely accessible server on this large company. And then once he got into that, he could start rummaging around the networks. And what you're and stealing their data. And what you're seeing here is a screenshot of one of our tools called Trillion, which we built internally. And Trillion's got well over 11 billion usernames and passwords that it's found on these forums so far. And on the end of the slides, there's a little link. If you want to search yourself in there, then we've got a link for you to enable you to be able to do that. But, to sort of sum up what I've just said. So these usernames and passwords are actually being stolen from websites. So there's this entire community that are really having a great deal of fun breaking into websites like LinkedIn has been compromised in the past. They managed to break in, steal all of the data from LinkedIn, and then upload it to one of these forums. And the reason why security practitioners like myself and Mark keep banging on about, like, don't reuse passwords, is because the passwords that people were using on LinkedIn were then visible to attackers, and they also had your email addresses, so they can kind of go, oh, John at Crossword cybersecurity.com with a password of pencil. That's interesting. Let's try that on Office 365 and see if it works. And if you're using the same password over and over again, then criminals are able to now see what those are and then try and attack different systems with them. And as I mentioned here, we've got well over 11 billion usernames and passwords in Trillion right now. And there are only 8 billion people on the planet. So there are enough usernames and passwords to affect every single one of us, potentially in some way or another. Okay, now breaking into websites is a highly popular sport in the criminal underworld, and that's what we've been talking about up to now, trying to break into somewhere like LinkedIn, download the data, and then share it with their peers. But the attackers always move on. Again, we saw that with where they're sharing the data. So they've gone from the dark web to the deep web to Telegram. They're always evolving, and they're also evolving with these credential attacks as well. So somebody figured out a little while ago, quite some time ago actually, that another good place to get passwords from is your computers. So actually, if they can convince you somehow to download a piece of malware, then there's a new piece of malware now called stealers. And what the job of these stealers are is to try and rummage around on your computer looking for specifically interesting usernames and passwords and credit card numbers and things like that. And one of the places they like getting those from is the browser, actually. So browser security is pretty good. It gives you the opportunity to save your usernames and passwords in the browser. That's great. But what the malware is now being able to do is act as you. So actually it'll infect your computer. It will actually be John who's talking to the browser as far as the malware is concerned, or as far as the browser is concerned. And then it can start going, okay, what was the username and password I saved for Amazon? What was the username and password I saved for Office 365? And it's starting to being able to pull that information out of browsers as well now. So this is the next kind of evolution of how they're trying to steal usernames and passwords. And once again, so this is why we encourage you to use password vaults, because actually password vaults are designed by their very nature to be very, very secure, keep all your passwords in one place, keep them random, and actually the malware can't access the password vault. And that's why, again, we as a security community are so keen on password vaults. And just talking a little bit more about another market which got shut down just beginning of April, I think it was. Again, just to give you a flavour of what we're up against as an internet community. So there was a marketplace called the Genesis Market, shut down about a month ago. And again, these guys took the attack to another level. So if I try and log into Office 365, for example, and I put my username and password in, behind the scenes, Office 365 is doing all sorts of other checks. It's actually saying, is this the same IP address that John usually uses? He's using Chrome right now. Does he usually use Chrome, or does he usually use Firefox? What's his screen resolution set to now? Is it different to what it was last time he logged in? So the username and the password are some of the kind of core elements to let you into the browser, into the website. But behind the scenes, a lot of websites are doing other clever checks as well to make sure that you are who you say you are. So the Genesis Market figured this out as well. So what they managed to do was build, again, this technology which would actually identify all of those other characteristics of your computer as well. So actually, okay, John's username for Amazon is john@hotmail.com, and his password is pencil, but also his IP address is this, his operating system is this, his browser that he's using is this, his IP address is this, his resolution is this. And so they actually captured all of this information into a bundle, and then they were selling those for like $1. So actually, who wants to buy John's username and passwords and all of his computer characteristics for $1? And not only could you download it for $1, it would give you a plugin, so you could just install it on your computer, and it would, as an attacker, it would suddenly make your computer appear identical to mine. So then all of those fraud checks no longer work again. So again, this is just an example again of how sophisticated this is becoming. And one of the consequences of this, we think, is actually this is quite often how ransomware is happening. So actually, username passwords, very boring, like, we're talking about them all the time. But actually, if someone can get a foothold into your network, even if it's as a very low privileged user, they can then spend time there. They can start emailing other people. They can start figuring out how things are connected. They can spend months doing that. So by the time they actually launch a ransomware attack, they've managed to really compromise quite a significant amount of your network and do quite a significant amount of damage. So this is while these usernames and passwords sound very boring and that, security people keep banging on about them, they are the easiest way into the network to do the most amount of damage. So just again, proof in the pudding. So this is another individual who we used to follow, who's again, I believe, been arrested now. He used to go by the name of Gnostic Players, and he again, you'll see he's a very young guy, and quite often, honestly, there are very highly sophisticated Russian attackers and nation states and all of that. They're typically going after the major targets. They're typically going after like banks, large cryptocurrency halls, industrial systems. They're not going to worry particularly about a small company unless you're doing something very, very sensitive, like you've got a PR relationship with the Prime Minister or something. They're not going to worry about you. If you're just kind of selling cookies or like running a small insurance firm, they're probably not going to worry about you. But lesser criminals will, and they're really just trying to go after the easiest targets. And this individual here, as I say, he's going by the name of Gnostic Players. Interesting chap. He came across as very like neurodiverse, because he was actually, after he started stealing data, he was very, very successful. He was doing a huge amount of damage on quite big websites, but he was happy to like tell everyone who he was. He was trying to prove he is who he says he is, and there's a picture of him with his passport and things. Again, not great operational security. He's going to get caught. But we actually exchanged some messages with him and asked him what he was doing with all the money that he stole. This individual stole, I think, $10 million from a crypto exchange. And he said, like, I buy cars, and this is a picture of me with my car. And actually, because he stole the Bitcoin, and a lot of criminals are stealing cryptocurrency, it's very easy to spend it, actually. And then he was able to literally order cars just using the Bitcoin that he'd stolen. And then a low loader would turn up with a Porsche on the back. So a lot of this activity, as I say, just to reiterate, there are definitely nation states, there are definitely sophisticated attackers. They're not really after small business. They are after the big wins, the cryptocurrency exchanges. They're after the banks. They're after the nation state secrets, industrial information. But there are thousands and thousands of hobbyists, I call them that, who want to break into as much as they can for fun. So just to give you another insight into that. So the last slide on this then really is things to take away from this is, hopefully I've emphasized why it's important to create unique passwords for each application, because they're spilling out all over the place all the time. Applications are losing them, websites are losing them. But if you've used a unique one on each site, then it cannot be reused to try and access your corporate systems or other things that you use. Phishing is still a very popular way of trying to steal usernames and passwords, so definitely keep an eye out for that. The biggest one here for me is use a password safe. There are free ones out there, so you don't have to spend money on this. They're less sophisticated than some of the commercial ones. I use a free one. It has characteristics that I like, but what it means is I've got one password to remember. I've got thousands of unique passwords in there that I don't even know, but I can use those to log into my sites. And if anyone ever managed to steal one, it would be useless anywhere else. Once again, multi-factor authentication significantly reduces your vulnerability here. If you run, there are lots of businesses on here, I know. So if you have a public-facing website or application, I know cost is sensitive and price is important, but try and think about getting it penetration tested. A lot of people use things like WordPress and things like that. They're not always the most securely built applications. So if you're starting to collect large amounts of data from your customers for whatever, for marketing reasons, for sales receipts, things like that, think about trying to get somebody to penetration test that once a year, so that you don't have any glaring security holes that somebody's going to be able to rummage into and pinch all your stuff. So I think that's it from me. So yeah, if you want to find out more, there's a little link there. So Crossword, as I say, we have an inbuilt tool that kind of monitors usernames and passwords. You're welcome to go to that link, and there'll be a little form you can fill out, and then somebody will run a little scan for you and just see whether or not you've got any exposure. It runs across your whole domain. So if you're using john@gmail.com, it won't work because you don't own gmail.com. But if you own, johnstoys.com, then it will go and look and see whether there are any email addresses for johnstoys.com. And I believe that's it from me. So I think we're on time. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That's a really great introduction to a load of stuff. I'm going to ask a burning question that's popped up in the chat because Rachel won't forgive me otherwise. Is the password thing on iPhones classed as a password vault, or should I be using something else?
Yeah, so iPhones are really good actually. So if if you pretty much live and die on your iPhone and you store your passwords on your iPhone, it's as far as I'm aware, it's as good a security as you can get. I think Apple does a really good job on iOS, so it's very, very secure. And yes, if you've got that little app where it goes, do you want to generate a unique password, and then it stores it in the phone, that's effectively a password vault. It's generating a unique password each time, it's saving it to your phone, which actually is a very secure device. You've got biometric access before you can actually access those passwords. So it's a great thing to do. It can be a slight pain in the neck if you want to log into something on your PC and then you've got to open your phone and type in this massive long string of letters. But it is an ideal solution for that.
Cool. Okay, there's a couple of others, so I'll blat through them. 10-second questions. I only use a contact form and I'm not aware of a list it's created. Do you think it's being stored somewhere? Says Andy.
Probably, yeah. So if, again, I don't know anything about your website, but if it's something like WordPress and you've got a contact form, then quite often what they'll do is they'll send you an email going, hey, Mark from the Resilience Centre just sent you a contact request. If you actually go into your website as well, there might well be a little, like almost like a little spreadsheet where it's stored all of those requests as well. So it's quite possible that it has stored that stuff in your website. But if you've got to log into your website or you have a web admin, they should be able to look at that and tell you. I don't want to panic people, by the way. If you just got a little contact form and all it's collected is someone's email address and their phone number and a message or whatever, it's not the end of the world if that gets stolen. I mean, obviously, no one wants anything stolen, but it's not the end of the world. But if you're getting people to upload things that might be private, like legal contracts or credit card numbers or stuff like that, then that's a much bigger issue.
Absolutely. And so I'm just going to say briefly, if people are worried around their websites, then we can do from the Cyber Resilience Centre some testing for you through the student services. It's designed to be something that's really affordable for small businesses because we do it through local universities. So get in touch with us if you do want to know more and you are worried, but it's there if you need it. We're not here to sell it. Last question before we end, because I'm conscious of time, from Granger. Is the new standard from Apple, Passkey, a good way forward to try and replace passwords?
Yeah, I think it probably is. I mean, again, in the industry, we've hated passwords for over a decade, I think, well, forever, even longer than that. And we've always said, look, these have got to go. We've got to find a new way around them. But it's been a very difficult problem because how do you replace something that people know with something else? Apple are moving forward to this kind of whole concept of actually, your device is effectively going to deal with all of that. So as long as you've got your phone with you, it's going to communicate securely out. So yes, I think passkeys will, so long as we can all, I mean, Apple have got such a massive footprint now that they're probably one of the only companies, Apple and Google are probably the only companies in the world that can solve this right now. So I think it's a positive step, and we'll see how that moves forward over the next couple of years.
Fabulous. John, thank you so much. I'm going to end things there because I know people will have other commitments, but audience, it's entirely your fault for asking lots of questions. I'm just going to end by saying, as John mentioned, so there is actually a product on our website which Crossword are very kindly provided free for Southwest Cyber Resilience Centre users. The link is on the slide. It's Trillion, so it'll give you sight of not just your own password compromises, but those from your team. So it's really worth taking a look at. There isn't a catch for that, and we're grateful to them for providing it. Hope you found today to be useful. Please join us at a next one. It's always great to see you. And John, thank you again for sharing your expertise. We're really grateful. Have a great day, everybody.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Cheers.